Hey, how are you? Um, Ever since my last video, I've had inquiries about the Germanic concept of a god. Um, I guess to explain that in more of a digestible manner. Um, like, what is a Germanic concept of a god compared to a Celtic or a Indo-European uh, idea? Well, let's go back to the beginning. If you look at Survive the Jive, um, he's shown how the further you go back in Celtic and Teutonic history, at some point they're both the same. They both come from the same root source, the same place, and there's no distinction between both. The Germanic spiritual traditions and the Celtic spiritual traditions, they seem almost identical, which isn't surprising really, because they both come from the common Indo-European root. Now, if you look at the Roman historians' version of the wars against Germanic and Teutonic tribes, they don't talk about religion a lot, really. These are classic propaganda texts, similar to Julius Caesar's texts on the Gauls, uh, basically dehumanizing them as pagan savages that have these barbaric, backward rituals, but they don't go into that great of detail. The Germanic idea of a god seems to formulate out of the kind of Indo-European Celtic idea of the sacred tree. The sacred tree is common to both the Celtic tribes and the Germanic tribes. You have the Immersal within the Germanic tradition, and then they have the Celtic trees, the oracles, and so on. It lasted all the way into the modern, when I say modern, I mean like the Middle Ages and the Renaissance era of Gaelic society in terms of the sacredness of tree and tree oracles and tree alphabets and so on, and Ogham script. Now, there's a distinction there between the Germanic rival of the idea of God as Wotan, or Odin to the Scandinavians, Wotan or Wotan to the Germanic Anglo-Saxons, and so on. Well, this is a very distinct form of God. It's monotheism plus. He's not the only God, he's one of many, but he is the father of a pantheon of gods similar to the classical concept of Jove or Zeus that you have in Roman and Greek societies, pagan societies. The Germanic idea of God is very different than the Jehovah. He's a warlike God. He's a God of protection, conquest, a God of violence, as well as a powerful father figure. Uh, and he's seen this same sort of sense that a great warrior king would be seen among the Jarls of the Scandinavian Viking world. His persona is very much that of don't mess with me, tear you to bits, rather than I'll punish you because you don't believe in me. Now, there's a very interesting conspiratorial element to this as well. If you look at Carl Maria Wilgut, uh, there is a belief that a Christian version of Jesus Christ was altered specifically when it entered in from the classical pagan world, say in Greece, Rome, Byzantine, North Africa, and into the Northern European world. The early Christian monks, mostly were Irish and Scottish, by the way, arriving in places like the Odenwald in southern Germany, adapted the Christian story of Jesus Christ and the crucifixion to tie into Odin. Odin hanging from the Yggdrasil tree, and Wotan's sacrifice, seen for knowledge, was then transmuted into Christ's crucifixion for the redemption, the Redeemer of the Western soul. Now, the likes of Carl Jung believe there was a schism created with this, and this happened, and it may have. People like Carl Marie Wilgut, they really did believe Jesus Christ was probably a completely different story until the Christians entered into the Germanic world. And then they, rather than Christianize Wotan, they Wotanized Christ. And they, instead of Wotan being hung from the Yggdrasil tree for knowledge of the runes and entering enlightenment, that was replaced with Jesus Christ hanging on the cross for redemption and salvation, for original sin, and the end of sacrifice. You see, this is one of the real clues here. The King James Bible makes a very big deal that Jesus Christ represented the end of sacrifice. And all the usual Presbyterian groups, like Baptists, Pentecostals, Calvinists, automatically believe the word sacrifice meant killing victims, virgins, children, animals for the gods to appease them. But in reality, it meant no sacrifice. It meant no more gods that would sacrifice in gaining insight or wisdom that would be put on top of the tribe or passed on to the tribe. And that's when they talk about no more sacrifice. That comes directly from the Germanic world. There's no more Odin. See, Odin self-sacrificed. It's more, they're saying they perverted the meaning of sacrifice. When you ask the modern Christian today, most of them will say pagan sacrifice meant killing animals, people, in order to appease the sky gods or the earth gods or the thunder gods or the river gods. That went on only in exceptional circumstances, i.e. things were really bad, they needed a sacrifice, and 99 times out of 100 it would be a captured prisoner from an army or a local pedophile. It wouldn't be just randomly picking the best looking woman in town because you need her DNA. And definitely not your best warriors in order to continue the betterment of the tribe. Carl Jung believed that this transformation of Wotan into Christ, possibly as a result of this perversion of both original stories, had damaged the Germanic soul, damaged this Germanic psyche to the point where it constantly looked through it for Freya Christ, which is, I'm saying that wrong, but the Germanic version of the new Christ. And looking for this to save the Germanic people and not the people as a whole. And this is obviously based on a corruption or a perversion of not letting them have Wotan or paganism back. That's where that comes from, this subconscious want. And he believed when Hitler came to power, the tool of society, the Intercontinental Hotel in Munich, was obsessive in looking for the Freya Christ. There was a belief in, because of animism and Ariosophy, that they were looking for a pagan god. They weren't. They were looking for an undoing of this Christian myth and a restoration of the Wotan idea in that version of Christ. The Freya Christ is the future Christ, is not known to be someone from the Middle East, but the return of a Wotan. Because there had been such domination of the Lutheran Church in Germany, even till the 20th century, it was very strong memories of horrific persecutions of witches and massive witch burnings, entire populations wiped out by Lutherans looking for heretics. That you couldn't come out in Germany, even in the early 1900s or 20th century, and say, we need Wotan back. The stigma was still there. This is how dangerous the Lutheran Church was. It was still there. And that's where that comes from. I think there's a lot of truth to this. And it's a very believable thing that there is a very distinct... It's probably what made the distinction between the Celtic peoples, which probably all German tribes were, and the Teutonic tribes which came out of that. The Teutonic tribes developed a whole different spiritual pantheon based upon the idea of Wotan and the sacrifice of the god in order to attain enlightenment for the tribe. And that's probably why Lutheranism took off in mostly Protestant countries, previously Nordic spiritual countries. It was almost like a software hack on what had already been instinctually in these people. So yeah, the Germans have, the Teutonic tribes have a different notion of God, quite different than the other European tribes. And that's because there was a point in Germanic, it would be fascinating to know what caused this or what made this happen, but there was a point in Germanic spiritual history where the idea of the Wotan and the Germanic god really took root and probably created the German psyche that we know today, that is under the jurisdiction of a kind of weird false hybrid. There's a huge history there that we don't fully know about. It's all been hidden. It's been damaged by the Third Reich and everyone else. There's something remarkably special about the Germanic idea of gods. I'm not talking about in a monotheistic or polytheistic sense, but one that was unique to the Germans. And it's almost like there's times that I do think all of Christianity was hidden or re-engineered in order to Christianize these Teutonic tribes. And that's something that needs a lot more study and a lot more work. And like I said, the Celtic tree, the Immersal, the crucifix, the Germans have unfortunately, have their own version of British Israelism that tried to dovetail the Hebrew characters into their own history. And they tried to make out that the Immersal tree, which looks just like the ovaries and the birth canal, is somehow a tree from the Middle East, a pan tree. And this is the kind of same stuff done over and over again. These perversions of European culture is shocking. It's shocking. This is why I have no time for these types that are trying to revive these beliefs and struggle for personal salvation and self-autonomy, is to get to a more or a better translated version of sacred text. I think that has to end, and I think this generation will be the one to draw the line in the sand and at least rebuild whatever information we can find. This European concept going forward, and it can't be centralized in the same way Christianity hasn't been centralized. There's not one defining figure. There's just dominating agencies, which people can personally identify with. That's what makes this concept so special, because it carries with it a sense of individuality. And like Hinduism, you choose this god or goddess that you worship. That's because you relate to them and their struggle and their stories, or their energy systems and energy forces within the concept, these struggles and feelings and expectations of one's own life. And I think that's real freedom. Well, hope you all have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.